The collateral damage, let me very quickly, because each of these could be a lot of explanation, but it's just too much in one evening. This could have been another series of 4 or 5, but let me do these quickly. We've talked about them in various times in the past. The collateral damage is not just the United States, but it's to all the developed countries, Europe and Japan as well. So what we have already seen is the bill is being presented in Greece and it's being presented in all these other countries, and they're having one hell of a difficulty financing it, and basically you're up against the wall. The Greek debt is now priced with about a 98% probability of default, and so the net result is the collateral damage is Europe is grossly weakened, their economy is weakened, so that in turn means our economy is weakened because they're not going to be buying our products. So they're in the same fix that we are. In fact, all the developed countries of the world are reinforcing each other on the downside. So that's number one. Number two is we have a recession coming, and it's going global. It's slowing down in Europe faster than it's slowing down here, but it's going to get here. The people I read, one of them in particular, went out on a limb the other day, 98% probability of recession. To me, it's in that category without a model. But things are slowing down in every direction. Ever since QE2 ended June 30th, which was one of the last pieces of stimulus we could throw at the problem, once it went away, so did all, the economy just keeps settling down and going backwards. The confidence numbers are terrible. It just came out yesterday. What was amazing is after Obama makes his speech on Thursday, and you'd think somehow the confidence of small business would be elevated. Well, that survey came out this morning, and they're not. They're depressed by the speech, which I thought. So the point is, so income goes down, and confidence goes down, and it pulls spending away, so on top of it. So the recession, I'm just stating it, I'm not giving you, you'll see why, I mean, where it's coming from. We've just run out of gas, and I think that'll become more obvious as I speak. The third piece of collateral damage is essentially no banking. We do have lots of banks that open the doors every day and fly the flag, and when it happened in Japan in the 1980s and 90s, we called them zombies, and they might as well be called zombies because they're, every once in a while for the fun of it, I'll go into a bank and sit down and ask for the loan officer. And someone behind the teller gate quickly runs around to a loan officer desk because they don't have a loan officer to let me know the banking hours are probably over, why don't you go home? Their capital has been impaired first by the write-downs of the mortgages, and a lot of them haven't been written down because we got into cover-up accounting and not admit to it yet because we're not doing market-based accounting. And now there's some good news in the United States. Only 10% of the portfolio of commercial banks are in government debt, and it's mainly US government debt. So basically, they're okay on that asset. In Europe, it's just the asset category called government debt is 25% of the balance sheet, and they're not okay because it's all Euro debt, probably some US too. But the banking pretends to be solvent, and the lending is not taking place, and actually that's going to be the subject for sure of a future blog. And on top of that, what is really disturbing me enormously is the banking authorities are not chartering new banks who would have the capability of lending because they won't have impaired capital because they go in day one with capital. And that would be a solution, and it's a costless solution to the government, and it's so logical, which is why apparently they don't do it. By the way, coming out of the Depression, I happened to write one scholarly book. It was 2 years of your life in a library, and I don't think I'll repeat that one again. I'd rather lecture to you guys than write a book. But it had to do with, it was called The Depository Firm and Industry, History, Theory, and Regulation. Long title. And the first chapter or two, I reviewed what kind of banking policy we got into in the Depression. And during the Depression, similarly to the regulators today, they thought the best policy is not to allow entry of new solvent banks. There was not a new bank allowed into the game from 1933 to 1961. That's 28 years. And their mindset was, well, I guess there are two mindsets. One is we don't want any competition. The few guys that are remaining that we have guaranteed their deposit, one way out is to remove their competition. And that's the heart of their logic. The other I'll go through some other time, but the point is we don't have banking, and they're not allowing new banking. And it's costless. It's costless to us as depositors. It's a way out, a quick way out that won't cost us anything. The fourth piece of collateral damage, government budget deficit explosion. Now, when I'm talking about a government budget deficit explosion, by the way, can I go back? I have some pictures. Let me show you the recession, just in case you're doubting me. I forgot to throw this out. This is what is our capacity of production through time, and this is where the demand is. So we have this huge gap between where we stand today and where we have the resources to go, and if anything, the gap is getting larger. So the recession is here. Let me show you another piece of the recession in another dimension, and this is the employment part of the recession. This is the current cyclical, quote, recovery as compared to every other post-war World War II recoveries. So we're not even close. This was the tech boom and bust, and the recovery from the tech bust, which is and that's strung out. It's 4 years. That's 4 years. We've now reached 4 years. So we're now nowhere near close. So that recession is alive and intact, and my expectation is that that gap's going to get larger. But getting back to the issue of the government budget debt explosion. A few things to say about it. You got to think in terms of the government debt as having at least two components, probably three anyway. One is what they call the structural imbalance. Namely, if you're at full employment or reasonable full employment, let's say the unemployment rate's 5%, you're growing at 3%. At that level of the economy, what is your fiscal deficit? At that point, it's supposed to be zero. And we've set up the system in such a way that if things get bad, we then the government can go into the market and borrow and start to spend to rev the economy up. So one of the most important things in terms of this budget discussion is the level of deficit during good times. And for the first 30 years after World War II, they were very careful in good times to make sure they ran a surplus so that they would have, quote, in the state of Texas, we have a rainy day fund to address the tough periods. But what we have in the deficit is the structural component of what would the deficit be in good times, and then you know the deficit's going to explode in bad times for two reasons. One is when the economy slumps, you take in less revenue, and you also have automatic expansion of government spending. And this is a good profile of it, of the government fiscal situation. This goes back from the year 2000, projected forward. This was projected about 11 months ago by the government, so you know it's not right. This is the Bush years. We had a reasonable expansion in the Bush years, yet we ran a deficit. We should have been running a surplus. It should have been adjusted to run a surplus. We did run a surplus here during Bill Clinton's years when we had the tech boom. And correctly so, we had a surplus and we really significantly reduced the outstanding balance of the debt. Then you go into this great 4-year recession we've been in, and then this might be the structural deficit, which should be really zero, but then you get the cyclical expansion because the expenditures increase and the revenues decline, so it gets larger and larger. Now, now, by the way, this is the best case projection by the White House based on us coming out of the recession and growing at 4%. Well, mind you, the long-term history of growth is 3%. And we're now having all kinds of constraints on growth and constraints on labor. So this is a fiction. And basically they're living on self-delusion. Because actually at this point the market doesn't believe anything they say. But even if we came out of the recession, we would still have this structural ongoing full employment deficit, which is very, very large. So that's how out of sorts we are, shall we say. So it's going to be one heck of a job recovering from this. So what we're doing is running a very large deficit. To give you some idea of the size of the deficit compared to historical episodes, and this is zero, a balanced budget, no deficit, zero. The Civil War, we got down to minus 10, a deficit of 10% of GDP. World War I, we got down to 20% deficit. World War II, we got down to about 27%. And here's where we are today, which is, it's actually 11%. So we've never in a peacetime period come across a deficit, and we're not in a recession yet. Wait till the recession comes. So that's what we're looking at, is another explosion of this fiscal deficit. So the cyclical component will pick up from here, and it's just going to get worse and worse. Then on top of that, we have another